Hey guys, what's up? It's Jack and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to be talking about XDefiant and last gen consoles. Now, as of this very moment, okay, as of this very moment, XDefiant is suited to launch with on Xbox Series X and S and PS5 and PC. And unfortunately, as of right now, PS4 and Xbox One are going to have to wait for some time after launch until they get the game released on those platforms. Now, with that being said, I do have some legit good news as far as the last gen goes, and that is that here's some proof. Do you guys remember where when Mark Rubin basically said that they were aiming for 120 hertz after launch? Well, sometime later, they were able to actually make it to where we got 120 hertz or 120 frames during the open beta. And it was something that initially that they weren't going to make, like they were thinking of that it would not make launch and it would come out at some point in time after launch. But guess what? We got it during the open beta and now we're going to get it for release. So what I'm hinting at here, what I'm trying to say is that as of right now, the news is that it's not going to come out on last gen as of the time of this recording. And the possibility is that that may change. They may get ahead of schedule and it may change. Now, I'm not a developer. I don't know the specifics that go behind all that, but all I know is that during the closed beta, everybody played at 60 frames per second. And by the way, for the inconsistencies of the game that we had during the closed beta, had actually nothing to do with the frame rate itself or the limitations of frame rate being up to 60. It was the fact that they were using old net code that just wasn't working nearly as well. And then obviously in the open beta, we got an improved net code. It was still a little inconsistent here and there, but it was vastly improved from what we got from closed beta. At least in my experience, it was night and day. There still needed work to be done and things to be ironed out, but it was a significant improvement, right? But it had nothing to do with the frame rate itself, because when it comes to last gen, and this is another reason why I'm bringing up frame rate here, because when it comes to the last gen consoles have they're limited to 60 frames, right? Because those consoles are not capable of doing anything above 60. That's the main difference maker. That's one of the main difference makers between what the last gen is capable of compared to what current gen is capable of. So, but with that being said, I'm gonna take you back through a short trip down memory lane. I'm gonna obviously use Call of Duty as an example, because when it comes to XDefiant and Call of Duty, people can't help but compare one to the other, and rightfully so, and it makes sense because they're within the same kind of genre and there's a lot of similarities and all that stuff, right? Okay, cool. Now, whenever somebody asks you, what do you consider the best Call of Duty ever made? Well, chances are most people are not going to name any of the recent CODs as their potential greatest Call of Duty ever made, right? They're likely going to talk about games that were during the PS4, Xbox One era, or Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 era. Those are the games that have a more likelihood of making their list of what their particular greatest Call of Duty game of all time is, from a multiplayer perspective at least, right? So the thing that all those games have in common, despite the fact that they're also two different generations of console, is that they all ran at a maximum of 60 frames per second. And we're not going to count PC on this, obviously. PC can go above that, but we're just talking mainly for console here, since the main subject is about console in the last generation. So ultimately, now, and the thing is, ultimately, do you make a game, do you consider a game better because of its frame rate? I mean, would you say a game is worthy of GOAT status because of the frame rate? Well, in this particular case, the answer is no. Now, frame rate is important when it comes to a multiplayer first-person shooter, especially if you've experienced it before, because as I've been told before, and I agree, once you see it, you can't unsee it. I totally get that. But I've even gone back and forth between 60. And the thing is, to this day, people still prefer a minimum of 60 when it comes to like anything. There are games that are coming out to this day that are actually capped at 60, and some even capped at 30, unless you have a PC. For the most part, there's, obviously those are a few exceptions, but you get the point. 60 frames per second, in my opinion, is still passable. Now, there are people out there that have said that there's two sides to this. There's people out there that have said that the old gen consoles are going to kind of hold the new ones back. And I can kind of understand and see where they're going, where they're coming from when it comes to this. But I also slightly disagree because XDefiant is not the most technologically advanced type of shooter. It doesn't require you to have the best, doesn't, it looks clean and everything like that, but it doesn't require the best graphics. It's, it's very, I don't want to use the term black and white, but well, let's just say it's very cut and dry. I'm still going to use it. It's very cut and dry, basic compared to some of the graphical advancements with other games and stuff like that. But that's okay though, because XDefiant does not need to be that. It doesn't need to have the best graphics or visuals. Does it need to be smooth though? Yes. So if it runs on 60 or 120 or more, depending on your PC, but let's just say 120 for the sake of it, it needs to run smoothly and consistently. So now there are other people that say that the game is going to, it's basically going to take a huge hit if it doesn't launch with the last gen consoles as well. And I can certainly see where these people are coming from as well, because, well, it means a bigger player base. And the thing is, once you have players, you need to keep them, right? And the thing is, a lot of players that are casuals that are not me and you, for instance, and what I mean by me and you is like, if you're searching for things on the internet in terms of information for it, whether it's via YouTube video or looking up Google and stuff like that, you are an above average player or an above average fan, right? You're not, a casual or the most casual, which are the majority of players to this day, right? So the thing is, XDefiant is going to launch, let's say XDefiant launches on current gen and it doesn't have last gen as an option. A lot of these players that happen to be casuals as well still only have the last gen stuff, right? So they're going to see that it's not an option for them to play. So therefore, they're going to assume that it's not going to be available, like ever. So they're not going to, it's not like they're going to come back and check in to see if it's available, because they're not going to have any idea. They're not going to know, because the game launched and they're going to be like, oh, I can't play the game because I don't have a new Xbox, Series X or S, or a PS5. I've got a PS4 or an Xbox One and I can't play this game. Damn, that sucks. And then they kind of move on and they go and see what else they can play. And when you look at games like, let's say, Fortnite, for example, that game is available on pretty much every platform, and it runs as smooth as it possibly can on those platforms. And right, and then the newer the console you have, or the better technology you have with the PC or whatnot, the smoother it runs, and that's just the way it works. So XDefiant needs to basically accomplish this in a similar feat. Now, again, like I said, I'm not a developer. I don't know the specifics that go behind making everything come out in as many platforms as possible, but I do know this though, at least in theory, like during the closed beta, the initial closed beta, the first one where we were all limited to 60 frames, I think that equals very much to a last gen console experience as far as frame rate is concerned. Because, and the reason why I mentioned frame rates is because the frame rates is one of the big differentiating factors between last gen and current gen. Last gen is only limited to 60, and current gen is limited to 120. And ultimately at the end of the day, they've already gotten data in terms of the 60 frames and stuff like that. So, and in my eyes, it's like, well, if you can make 120 hertz by launch, or even before launch, because we got it in the open beta, it's like, well, then you can certainly make 60. But at the same time, one thing I do know is that last gen consoles have a different learning curve to them, and the new consoles have a different learning curve to them. So like whenever a new console comes out, because I've watched a lot of behind the scenes of making of videos of different video games, I do know that when a new console comes out, there's they need to learn the infrastructure of that console, so that way they can develop the game around it, right? And the same thing goes for last gen. But the thing is, with last gen, they're already familiar with it. However, despite the fact that they're familiar with it, they still need to make the adjustments so that way it works with that console as well. And the thing is, well, if everybody's going to be playing on the same field, right? Some of us are just, the only difference being some of us are going to be running at 60 and other people are going to be running at 120. But the thing is, like, how do you make those two things work together, I think is where the trick is, right? You got to be able to make it to where everything works and fits together, because ultimately that's the goal, right? Especially with cross-play and input-based matchmaking with as an option as well, is something that is of big importance, because having that game play on multiple consoles, or multiple generations of consoles actually, on many platforms, at one time is definitely a challenge. I mean, even look at Call of Duty Ghosts. You know, obviously Call of Duty Ghosts launched on a multitude of consoles, right? Which was a big endeavor for the developers, right? And Mark Rubin was one of the developers as well. He was the lead guy, so he could probably tell you firsthand just how hard it was, simply because they had they had a deadline to meet and they had more consoles to release for. So the thing is, right now, there's no doubt that the attention, the majority of that attention, if not all the attention, is put on the current gen consoles. But like I said in the beginning of this video, and through the example that I gave earlier, is that it is possible, because again, they got ahead of schedule with the 120 hertz, which wasn't even supposed to be there at launch, but now it was at open beta, and it's certainly going to be there at launch. So is it possible for this to happen with the last gen consoles? Yes, but I do believe that it is more time consuming, because they have the PlayStation 4 to worry about and the Xbox One to worry about, right? They have those two different avenues to worry about. So there's lots there, you know. And let's not forget about the fact that the developers of games like Fortnite or Call of Duty, for instance, right, that release on a multitude of platforms, they have a bigger development team. To my knowledge, they have a bigger development team, so therefore they are able to kind of get things done faster, because of the fact that they have the numbers to develop for everything. XDefiant, on the other hand, to my knowledge at least, they don't have that kind of, you know, manpower. But despite all that, the interesting thing is that they do have the right players behind the wheel. In other words, what I'm trying to say is they've got the right developers working on this. A lot of these developers are former Call of Duty developers, so they have experience in the genre, versus somebody that would be brand new, or somebody that's developed a different genre that would operate a little bit slower and less efficient than somebody who's very, very experienced at what they do, and they've done it before, they've met deadlines before, and this is nothing really new to them. But with that being said, there's still the dilemma or the challenge of basically releasing on as many platforms as possible. Now, where do I stand on this, right? As we get close to the end of this commentary here, where do I stand on this? I would absolutely love it if the game released on every single platform at the initial launch, for everybody together at the same time. But at the same time, I want the game to release as smoothly as possible, and I don't think there should be anything to compromise that. However, releasing on as many platforms as possible, to me, is just as important as having a smooth launch. They're both equally important. And the reason for this is the same, and that is the player count. You could lose player count if you don't have a smooth launch, and you can lose player count if you don't launch on certain platforms. That's just a fact. The game is not going to be as popular, so that is a potential problem. So my solution to this is, like, how do you make it to where how do you make it to where this game will get those last gen players to download your game, despite the fact that it's launching a little bit later? How do you do that? And that is, well, there's a few possible solutions to this, or things that can at least lessen the losses, right? And that is, they're going to have to actually give a date in terms of when it's going to launch on last gen, or they're going to have to basically make it known to more people some way, somehow, that despite the fact that it's not available on this platform, and that it will be later on, because a lot of people are not going to know that. Like, they have to make some sort of effort in order to let the last gen console players know that it's going to release at some point in time, you know. And it's like, how do you grab their attention? So obviously a release date is one of those things, and then somehow, some way, shape, or form, letting those last gen console players know, you know, maybe when they go to look for the game online on XDefiant or something like that, maybe there could be a pop-up or something like that that says, you know, the game will be available for these consoles at this point in time, or something like that. So that way they know, or they can at least make a note of it to come back, if they even desire to come back. But it's a very, I don't know if there is such a direct way of impacting that. The only way, I would say the most efficient way to make things happen, is just to release everything on last gen. Like, if I could choose, I know some of you guys might be thinking of this to ask in the back of your head maybe, so I'm just going to say it now since it's kind of obvious to me. If I could choose to delay the game a little bit so that way it could launch on every single console, and you guys know how excited I am for XDefiant, right? I've made a ton of videos on it and stuff like that. You guys should know at this point how excited I am for XDefiant, right? Okay. So if I could choose to delay the game so that way it could have a release on every single console, I would do it. However, with that being said, there's another problem. The problem is that the months of September and October are stacked in terms of all sorts of video game releases that are going to come out. And that's why they want to release towards the end of summer, because they want to have their open window to where they get as much attention as possible. And November is not an option simply because of the fact that Call of Duty is going to come out in November, like it always does. December is holiday time, so give or take. So, and obviously, you delay anything more than that, then it's like, you know, people are going to forget about your game as it is. So, and at the same time, people just they won't want a delay of that much. Especially since the guys know that they can release sooner. So, so there is that dilemma as well. So, my opinion is that there is a chance that the game could still release on time on all the consoles, but it still may not happen. So as I close this commentary, I want to know from you guys, if you could choose, how would you do it, and what are your thoughts on last gen XDefiant versus current gen and stuff like that? Do you believe that it would slow things down? Do you believe that XDefiant doesn't stand a chance unless it launches on as many consoles as possible? What do you think of the whole frame rate thing? Do you have faith in the developers? Do you believe that the game is going to have a smooth launch? And of course, when do you think they will actually release? My prediction is sometime in August, I would say. Again, unless they get ahead of schedule. If they get ahead of schedule and they release even earlier than that, then that means that, hell, maybe in September or early September or late August, the last gen console versions might have their own thing. And the thing is, they might even make an announcement to where it's like, okay, we're set to launch on such and such date. Or they might just shadow drop and launch. And then they'll make an announcement saying basically that last gen consoles is going to be available at such and such date. So, and you know that they're not going to announce a release date unless they're sure, right? Because they're trying to be as transparent as possible. They want to meet all their deadlines legitimately, and they want to release as smooth as possible, which is what they are prepping to do right now. So, so yeah, it's kind of an interesting scenario with XDefiant. I know that it is a priority for them to release on last gen. So just like it was a priority for them to release at the time that they're releasing, as well as or within that time window, as well as you know, things like the 120 hertz, you know, the game modes, the weapons, and all that kind of stuff, the maps. So they certainly do have a lot on their plate in terms of the work they need to do in terms of making sure the game operates as smoothly as possible, as well as all the features that are featured within the game. And then they can focus on all that kind of stuff, because if they do release on current gen only, and if the game does not operate properly, then the game is going to have a really big problem, and a lot of people are going to lose interest. Like people are going to lose interest, and you do not want, you know, a Halo Infinite situation. You know, granted, the game released, you know, operating just fine. Still, you don't. There are so many different ways and factors that play a role in a game's success or non-success. It's just the way it is. So, so ultimately, we are just going to have to wait and see what happens. But as you can see, this discussion is not one to be taken lightly, despite the fact that you may be on one side or another side. It is an important situation, and it is an important subject, because the more people you have playing your game, the better the game will be off for it, especially if the game, you know, launches smoothly. So, but at the same time, you can't really compromise a smooth launch either. So, the devs have all this running through their minds while they're creating this game and while they're prepping it for launch. So that is what they're going through, and that is what we are anticipating as an audience. So with that being said, let me know down in the comment section what you think. Thank you all very much for taking the time to watch and or listen. I know this video was longer than usual, but it's important enough to let out there. So again, thanks a lot, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.